I'm going to wait a couple more minutes for more members to join us before we get started.
Add numbers together, and that's fine.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. We ready, Jennifer?
Yes, Mr. Chair, your recording has started.
Awesome. All right, let's go ahead and do a roll call.
Okay. Miss Allard?
Here.
Mr. Constant?
He will be unable to join us today.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Miss Kennedy?
Here.
Miss LaFrance?
Here.
Mr. Perez Verdia?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Miss Quinn Davidson?
Here.
Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Ms. Zolotel?
Here.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer. So this is a special rules committee meeting. We have roughly 2 hours today. We just have one topic on our agenda, but before we do that, I want to do a quick Assembly Chair report, a few items. So first, Fred Dyson, he randomly called the clerk earlier this week, and interesting story, he wanted to get a recording of the nice things the mayor said about him when he was gone. So the clerk invited Fred to come into our meeting on May 19th so we could all say nice things about him to his face, and I think we have a resolution that's prepared as well. So just get whatever nice things that you want to say about Fred ready for May 19th. Second is mask selfies. So thanks to everyone who has sent in selfies to the clerk's office. If anyone else would like to send that in, please do so today. Third, thank you to the members for your patience as I keep pushing a lot of information out to you and asking for your feedback on a variety of things. We have a lot of really important work that we're going to be engaging in over the coming months, like we're doing today, kicking off the discussion on the various buckets of CARES Act funding and how we are going to be using that funding, discussions on the alcohol tax, as well as discussions on the 2021 budget, which while we may not vote on it until November, we are going to be kicking that process off very soon, and Suzanne will be sending you more information on that. Last night, everyone should have received an email asking for your thoughts on invitees to the various meetings that we're going to be hosting on our COVID-19 response for the remainder of the month. I want to underscore the importance of you suggesting invitees to me to make sure that your district is represented in these conversations, as well as any relevant groups. I would make the assumption that I invited all the right people to join us at the table. So please send me your invitee list. With that, I will go ahead and move on to our agenda topic. So CARES Act funding. We're going to start with the administration, and they're going to go through their understanding of any changes to Treasury guidance from the last time we talked about it, their understanding of the state process for allocating the funds. Then they're going to go into the buckets within the CARES Act funding, any details that they have to share on the administration's plan, and then questions that we may have. If you want to get in the queue, as usual, feel free to text me or to chat. Put yourself in the chat and I'll get you in the queue. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jason and Lance.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I am going to try to see if I can't make this work and share my screen. I did put together just a short presentation, and I'm going to go a little bit out of order than what you described, but I think we'll ultimately catch all of the items that you mentioned. So we've been having a number of conversations with individual members and the community about the CARES Act. Oh, sorry, hold on. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I need to fix my screen real fast. Hold on. Sorry. All right, can everyone see the screen now?
Yes, Jason.
Okay. So one of the confusing aspects to me as we've been having this conversation has been centered around that we keep referring to any of the different buckets that we're talking to as CARES Act funding, and to me that has been very confusing and complicated because there are a number of different buckets. So I'm going to just take a couple of minutes and talk about how I'm looking at this. I'm looking at it very much as kind of a three-legged stool, essentially, and I'll explain that as I go through this. So obviously there's the overarching CARES Act, and that was a $2.2 trillion stimulus package that Congress has passed. It's actually gotten larger, and I'll tell you why as we go through this. But essentially, the first leg that I'm going to talk about within this is a lot of the either programs or funding that is out there that the municipality never will really see, right? These are example is the Paycheck Protection Program. That is the initially within the CARES Act was $349 billion for small businesses to apply for. As I think many of you are aware, that money went very, very quickly. So Congress essentially refunded this program and the next one that I'll talk about to the tune of about $300 billion. I believe about $250 billion went into the Paycheck Protection Program. The numbers that we have most recently seen for the state of Alaska is that about 12,000 small businesses have applied and been approved for these loans, and they total a little over $1.6 billion. And I don't know what percentage that is compared to the rest of the state, but those are the most current numbers that we have seen. There is I believe, about $140 to $150 billion left in this program. So if small businesses still have not applied, they should look into it. There's still funding in it, but it is obviously going very quickly. The other one is the Economy Injury Disaster Loan, or EIDL. That one also went very quickly, and when Congress passed essentially stimulus package 3.5, they added an additional $60 billion into that one. There is still money in this one. I do not know how much, but this one is still available. And then going through some of the other big ticket items, obviously unemployment insurance was a very big piece of the CARES Act. It was added an additional $600 on top of what the state provides for unemployment insurance. Another very large one that folks are probably starting to see if they or will very soon are the stimulus checks in the amount of $1,200 if you qualify based on your income, and the additional $500 for each dependent child, again, depending on if you qualify. There are a bunch of business tax provisions for private business in there in terms of delaying payroll taxes or other taxes that businesses owe. There's a lot in regards to education in terms of either loans that individuals have taken out for higher education, and as well as we'll get into a little bit later, additional money for school districts across the country as well. Aviation is another big one. I think many people probably know that there's a lot of funding in there to help the aviation industry who is hurting as a result of this. And then there's a broad category that I'm just kind of looking at as consumers. And while there are a lot in there, just the couple that I'll mention in terms of helping consumers is at least for those that have federally backed mortgage loans, they can defer those and not accrue any interest or late payments if they're having trouble making them now. So this is one leg of the stool. These are a lot of things that the municipality and local governments around the country will never actually see any of this, but this is helping helping every community around the country. The next leg that I'll get into are kind of the direct payments that the municipality might see, and I'll try to describe them as best as I can as I go through this. But essentially, within the Department of Agriculture and USDA, you have SNAP and WIC programs that are going to be receiving additional funding. We already have a program set up that our health department runs, so any additional money that comes in from the state through that will be obviously pushed out that way. The Department of Justice issued additional money for burn grants. So these are typically grants that local law enforcement agencies can apply for. And we believe that the amount that Anchorage and APD can apply for is in the neighborhood of about $1.3 million. And again, for a lot of these, there are very specific requirements and very specific things that the money can be used for. So, as we move through this process, it's probably not going to be, as open a process as we will have on, say, the coronavirus relief funds that we'll be receiving from the state, where there are a lot less strings attached to that, and the administration, the community, the assembly can have a larger conversation about where do we want those funds to go to. Some of these funds are going to be very dedicated to, for instance, additional PPE, potentially some payroll costs, but typically very specific based on what the grant program already is. Within the Department of Homeland Security, there are firefighter grants, again, probably pretty similar to what the Department of Justice does in terms of their burn grants, but we are looking at applying for those as those are being made available, so that will help the fire department, obviously. We have the Department of Housing and Urban Development that has additional funding for CDBG grants or ESG grants. We believe that at least right now, there is probably in the neighborhood of about $1.6 million that we'll receive through that. Potentially more as more of it is released from the federal government. The Department of Education, I'll just mention this one, but I think this is probably one of those that whenever you guys have your next joint assembly school board meeting, this would probably be a good topic for them to actually talk about. But there is obviously a lot of money that will be coming in, and one of the RPLs that have already been approved by the legislature and the governor provided, I believe, statewide an additional roughly $48 million in education funding. I'm not 100% sure what the amount that the Anchorage School District will receive, but I believe it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 11 or $12 million. But that'll be something that, again, the next joint school board assembly meeting, that would probably be a good topic of conversation. The other is, or another one is the Federal Aviation Administration. I think most of you have probably seen a lot of the news releases, but Merrill Field is in line to receive roughly $18 million for things that they do out there. We are still kind of looking and learning about what the rules are around those funds, but that will obviously this will be one of those that will require a lot of public engagement between the administration, the assembly, and the community on that. But keep in the back of your mind about $18 million there. Then there's the Federal Transit Administration. This program looks like there will be for Anchorage about $111 million. This money has to be split between the municipality and the Alaska Railroad. So we have to negotiate with the Alaska Railroad on what the appropriate split is on that. And again, same thing as the Merrill Field money. Once we have it, we'll have to make sure what all the rules are around it and what we can do with it. But total for Anchorage is going to be about $111 million. So that's the second leg of the stool that are more kind of direct from federal departments. And the final one is obviously the one that I think most people will want to talk about today, and that is what is referred to as the Coronavirus Relief Fund. This is the $1.25 billion that the state has received, and the governor has proposed roughly $562 million be distributed to local governments. I was just going to briefly kind of run through how the governor is potentially, or how his proposal looks. So the way that he is proposing to distribute the funds is through a couple of different ways. One, under column A, and I'll move down shortly, but column A is total cap. That is a community assistance program. There's a formula that they have created that distributes a portion of the $562 million through the normal program that most of us know, which is revenue sharing or community assistance. And then one of the things that we're still trying to figure out and get more detail on is they have direct cost distributions. We're not 100% sure how those are different or what different restrictions might be placed on that. But as you can see, the governor was proposing initially that columns A and B1 would be distributed on May 1st. We've obviously passed that date by a week. And then additional direct costs distributions on July 1st and October 1st. So I don't know if this is too small for most people to see, so I'll run through it pretty quickly. Basically, Anchorage is proposed to get about a little over $96 million in the community assistance program side of things. Typically, when we get that type of money, that is money that is we're allowed to spend however we see fit. It's above the tax cap money. And again, direct cost distributions in equal amounts, just under $20 million. Supposedly, whenever the legislature approves this, and then 2 additional ones, July 1st and October 1st. And again, trying to figure out what exactly those or that $60 million roughly needs to be used for. So with that, I will move to kind of the different areas that the administration is thinking about in terms of where this specific bucket of money should be used. And the first 2 that I'm going to talk about will be familiar because we talked about them Tuesday night, but obviously looking at expanding the Small Business Stabilization Grants Program. As we learn more about what the $1 million looks like and what the need is, we think this is an area of conversation that we should continue to have. The second one is obviously the rental assistance relief grants. And then the next 2 are ones that were brought up a little bit on Tuesday night, but we think they're very good ideas worthy of continued conversation. And those are micro grants. And, obviously we're talking about potentially for sole proprietors, but we might be able to expand that. And I think this is an area where there could be a lot of conversation and a lot of need. So, and then another one is with regards to child care relief grants, not necessarily money that goes to any one child care facility, but essentially setting up a program where individuals that, for whatever reason are having difficulty paying their child care bills, we believe that this is an area where we should at least have the conversation. Another one is around utility relief grants. Again, just a conversation. We're not sure necessarily how this would work, but we've seen other jurisdictions around the country kind of dip their toe into this to try to figure out how can they help individuals that are being impacted by COVID. And then the final one, and this is mainly based on additional guidance that has been released by Treasury, is using this to pay the payroll expenses for our first responder departments. So that would include APD, AFD, and AHD. So with that, I know that there will likely be additional questions, but I was forwarded a list of a couple, and I'll run through those. I don't know if Alex Slivka is on the line, but the first question were, what are the rules around property tax and business inventory tax? I may kick that to him if he's online right now.
I'm here, Jason. I guess the questions, looks like somebody's got their, okay. So what question do you want to ask about that?
Well, I think the question was likely around what are the dates and are there other rules about what we could potentially do with property tax or business inventory tax?
So I think that first for property, the Assembly has approved moving the payment dates 1 month out, which we were able to accommodate based on understanding of cash flow to July 15th and September 15th. The penalties and interest for late payment are still there. And again, as a reminder, due to the very antique nature of our tax collection and assessment program, which we are in the middle of upgrading, we can't really change a lot of that functionality. If the question is, how could some of this money be applied possibly to tax relief? That is quite challenging to do. And, the suggested best route, the easiest route is, I think, as Jason has said, this is nice, but we don't have the money yet. But when we have the money and when we have a much better idea of, what our expense is going to be and what possible revenue shortfalls we'll see due to lower tourism, that when that all is quantified, it would be easier to just set the mill rate for 2021 based on the information that we know, because we are really not structured in any way, shape, or form, both from a system standpoint, nor from the fact that we have well over 92,000 separate individual properties to be able to calculate and send out a refund. And again, so there's that business inventory tax. So just as a reminder, those valuations are set based on the inventory that's in place on January 1 of 2020. We fully anticipate changing the payment dates. So normally those payment dates are, I think, August 30, the end of August and the end of October. And I think we are comfortable changing those dates to end of October and end of December. Just as a reminder, property taxes roughly 500 million, business inventory taxes roughly 50 million. But those dates have not been set yet. We don't normally set those until I think June or July. I'll stop there and see what other questions are.
Thanks. And actually, before you go on, Jason, I do have a couple questions. Meg?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question wasn't related to this question. It was actually back on the last slide. So I don't know if you want to wait and see if there are more around property and business inventory taxes.
Sure. I'll go to Suzanne, and if she has a question on this one. Suzanne?
Thanks, Felix. Actually, I don't. I have more of a general question.
Got it. Okay, then I think Crystal does.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yes, I have some questions. I understand that we don't necessarily have the mechanism currently. We don't have the software to actually manipulate all of the calculations in such a way that we could offer a reduced tax bill, or however you want to look at that, for reducing or applying some tax relief with that funding. But could we not hire people to kind of do a manual override, so to speak, and handle those kinds of things from maybe it might be a little archaic even at that. But if we have the funds to provide some tax relief, would we be allowed to also hire the people necessary to actually make that happen? Might be a totally different system than we're used to, but would the funding allow us to actually hire people?
Before Alex jumps in with that, I will answer, I think, the overarching question, which is, can we use some of this money for property tax relief? And based on the most recent FAQ and guidance from the Treasury that came out this week, I think the answer to that is no. They specifically have a question in there about, may fund payments be used to assist impacted property owners with the payment of their property taxes? And they answer that in the negative and say that no, we cannot use this money for that. But I'll let Alex maybe answer the practical question as well.
Okay, thanks, Jason. And so just the practical question, and I'll say it again, just as a reminder, the way the budgeting has worked, we don't have a lot of extra people lying around at the municipality. We've hired 100 police officers over the last several years, which means we've let go 100 people in central government. The other thing is that, like I said, we have over 92,000 separate pieces of property. So to go through an RFP, to buy the software that we would need it, to hire the people and train the people on the software, and when it's already now the middle of May, we're already at the point where we're looking at possibly issuing these in 2021, at which point, again, it's easier, simpler, and we're much more structured to be able to just issue or set a lower mill rate in 2021. So the unfortunate practicalities of an antique software system, a very high number of properties that would have to be manipulated manually. I think it's just, at the end of the day, if we were to try to go to that route, we'd be sending the money out at the same time we would have with a lower mill rate. So I'll stop there.
Follow up, please, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, Crystal.
Thank you. I guess what I'd like to say, though, is I certainly understand the idea that we could just set a lower mill rate for next year. But the problem that we're actually facing, that people face now, is a cash flow problem. So to a certain extent, it's a nice thing to say, hey, your taxes will be less next year, but they're concerned about tomorrow, not next year. So and my next question then would be, if we can't do it through our antiquated tax system, whatever that is, could we give payments directly to property owners, and then that then allows them to pay their taxes? So is there an avenue or mechanism by which we would just have a certain amount per $100,000 worth of value? And again, yeah, I understand that's kind of time intensive or whatever, but is that allowed? Thank you.
Through the chair, Assemblymember Kennedy, I think the answer to that is no. That is not an allowable use of these funds based on the Treasury guidance that we have right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. John, I assume you're on this line of questioning?
Yeah, thank you. One thing is a comment on it. A lower tax rate next year would benefit all businesses, which is, I guess, everybody would be happy about. But, I think what we need to focus on is the businesses that were closed. For businesses that were deemed essential and allowed to stay open, they had a windfall. I mean, they certainly gained tremendously out of this. So I think anything we would do to help businesses should focus on those that had to be closed down. And my understanding is we did do, for businesses that were closed, we'll prorate their inventory tax. So if we were all closed for about a month, we'd pay a 12th less. But the, I think despite the challenges with the computer program, which in all honesty, I have simply no sympathy for. I know it's hard, but we had thousands of businesses had to close, and they are simply not equipped for that in any way, shape, or form either, but they had to do it anyway. So even though it's difficult, it was like for all those businesses, it was just tough luck, had to be done. And if we can come up with a way to help businesses through property tax relief or whatever, and it's difficult, I just say, well, tough luck. We're in a crisis emergency situation. That's just the way it is. Figure it out. Thousands of businesses are figuring it out now. But I would expect, no matter what we do, that there are going to be businesses that are going to be paying late because they simply don't have the cash. And we can find them. It's 10% if you pay two weeks late, and then you pay the interest rate, which is relatively low. But that 10% is a walloping hit. And we'd be kicking businesses when they're down. And I think that's something we need to look at is possibly lowering that penalty or just doing the interest, if they pay within 6 months or 12 months or something. But I think that just deals with the reality. You're going to have a lot of people who just simply can't pay, not through any fault of their own. And perhaps that waiving the penalty would be covered by CARES Act because it's not directly covering property tax. It's something separate, which would be the penalty. Answer that or comments, welcome, or just mull it over. Thanks.
Through the chair, Assemblymember Weddleton, very well received comments. I don't have a great answer to, a lot of that right now, except to say that I fully anticipate the federal government to have to step in again with additional stimulus packages, and I know that they are currently debating additional funding to state and local governments. My hope would be that as they do that, they take into account a lot of the concerns and questions similar to this that every local government is raising, and try to figure out, is there a way that we can have additional flexibility to do those types of things. But ultimately, I think everyone recognizes that Congress and the federal government are the ones that, potentially have the ability to continue to pump additional stimulus into local governments and into communities through them.
Thanks. Forrest, did you have a question on this line?
Yes. So, Jason, going off of what Crystal was asking about, and I think she correctly identifies the problem, which is a cash flow issue for a lot of folks in Anchorage, and it's immediate. It's right now. For me, the strong preference is not to base a payment off of property ownership, but just on residency. Not property owners, but people. A flat rate to a flat amount to every person who lives in Anchorage. And there are some imperfections to that, but you end up with a system like the federal stimulus or like the permanent fund dividend, where families get a cash payment and then are able to either pay their property taxes with it or pay whatever they think is most emergent at that time. Now, you said that paying it based on property taxes is not a allowable use. I think the answer is still no, but I'm curious, are direct cash payments just to residents an allowable use?
Through the chair, Assemblymember Dunbar, I think this is, we are going to quickly get into the contradictory nature of potentially some of the Treasury guidance, because based on some of that, I think my answer to you is yes. And the reason I say that is specifically one of the questions that Treasury specifically answers is, may recipients use fund payments to provide emergency financial assistance to individuals and families directly impacted by a loss of income due to the COVID-19 public health emergency? And they say yes. And they give a whole list of ways that it can be used, but they do put the caveat on there that such assistance is necessary. So I think one of the issues that we are going to continually run into is there is obviously a need and a want and a desire by a lot of people to do essentially what the federal government did, right? Which is provide a direct cash stimulus to every person in the United States. And I don't think we necessarily have the flexibility to do just a blanket direct cash payment to individuals with these funds, but if they are more targeted based on necessity and need, I think there definitely is some ability for us to do that. But I will potentially invite, I think Kate Vogel is on, I will invite her to potentially agree or disagree with my reading of the Treasury guidance.
This is Kate Vogel. Yeah, I agree with Jason and agree that it doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense to us, the lines that the guidance draws, but I agree that those are the lines that appear to be there.
So I would just follow up to that and say that I think we're hoping that the Treasury guidance changes in some certain ways. But I think we should try to be creative and think about a way that we could do that or something like that. I think we as a state are the best positioned of any state in the country to do that because we have the permanent fund dividend database. If there was some way to access that, that would give us very good information on how we could distribute that. And the last thing I'll say is, again, I strongly prefer that approach to the property tax approach because there are tens of thousands of renters in this city. And I do not believe that the property tax approach will sort of trickle down to them appropriately. Whereas if you give them money directly in their hand, they will both pay their rent and hopefully pay for other things as well. So again, I'm very much in favor of basing it on people, not property taxes. Thank you.
Thanks. Crystal?
Sorry, pushing buttons is sometimes tricky. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm getting kind of frustrated, and probably everybody is, because it just seems like at every turn, again, it's a no. Either they won't let us do what we'd like to do, or we don't have the mechanism by which to do it. So I'm hoping you'll get to, the point of saying, okay, this is what we know we can do. But I guess I just kind of wanted to comment too that the reason why I think I'm focused on property owners is because they're the ones that have a bill coming due. You may certainly have employees out there that are working on paying their rent, but we have, the ability to do some of the rental assistance. So I certainly want people to be able to access that, and that might be the mechanism by which to continue providing rental assistance or even mortgage assistance. But I think one of the things that I'm really interested in is figuring out, what's bleeding the most. And I want to put the tourniquet on the part of the body that's bleeding the most. And there are certainly some people in this community that they're okay. And that's one of the reasons why the stimulus money did not go to every individual in the United States. So there was a threshold by which that was actually allocated to certain income levels. So anyway, I guess what we're going to have to do is maybe have a couple of different things going on with a couple of different caveats to some of those different mechanisms. And I don't know if you've gotten into that kind of a conversation yet, but maybe there are some ideas out there as to how to make this work. That's what I'm looking for, because like I said, every time I've asked a question about something, the answer's just been, no, we can't do that. So now my question is, what can't we do? So thanks.
And through the chair, Assemblymember Kennedy, points very well taken. And just a brief comment on the first part. We also would desire knowing what the exact rules are, but to a certain extent that is somewhat out of our hands, and we have a very limited ability to influence that process outside of engaging with our congressional delegation, and obviously they provide support to our needs through the executive branch back in DC. But totally agree. I would very much appreciate and love clearer guidance and more flexibility.
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, this is Chris Schutte. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand in this thing yet. Just to follow on what Mr. Bockenstadt said, Assemblymember Kennedy, I was trying to come up with something witty to say that somehow worked in the word no, but my brain is failing me this late in the day. What I will say is we certainly understand and appreciate the feeling of wanting to do something for our neighbors, for our community, and having to come up with ideas and test them against the code, municipal code, and municipal policies and procedures, and finding the ideas that fit. One slight twist that I'll offer from what Jason and Alex both said is we're making this, we're creating these ideas as we go, much like the rest of the country is. And to that end, I strongly encourage Assembly members that as you see, read, or hear things from other communities, and you say to yourself, this looks like something that's good for, for Poughkeepsie, then we should try it here in Anchorage. Send them on over. There are a number of you that are very active in sending me your ideas, and we greatly appreciate that, because that helps us understand the ways in which other communities are doing it and try to tailor programs to make them work here in Anchorage. The body did a great job of supporting two of those ideas this Tuesday, with your approval of the money for the small business relief program and the rental assistance. So send us your ideas, and we love getting them. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
I would just add on that I 100% agree with that. Those are very much appreciated.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Crystal. So we have about 15 minutes left in this first hour. My hope was to get through all of the administration questions and presentation in this first hour. In the second hour, get through our own discussion for the assembly. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Jason to finish this slide, and then I'm going to go through the queue as I see it.
Okay, I just have a couple of additional questions that you sent me. And the next one I am going to kick to Lance, which the question was, is the intent of the administration when developing the 2021 budget to tax to the cap?
So the short answer to that one is yes. The guidance that we have, there was a ballot proposition a couple years ago about preserving the tax cap, and but we are looking at the elements inside the tax cap. The tax cap is made up of not only property tax, which is about, I think, 50 or 60% of it. There's other elements inside, there are other revenue sources inside that tax cap that calculate up or add additional to the property tax number. So the answer is yes, but a little bit to Crystal's question is, what can we do with the CARES Act money? Do we have any opportunity? And I've been looking at this to look at those other revenue sources, those other things that are inside the tax cap that we might be able to help with CARES Act money. It's going to depend, but we are looking at that, Mr. Chairman and Assemblymember Kennedy. But as we're building 21, we're going to build it in a similar fashion that we have in the past related to the tax cap. But obviously we have different and hopefully some innovative forces at play that will allow us to, while we can maintain the cap, we also can do everything we can to keep the property tax portion of that cap down. So that's a long answer to a short question.
Any questions on that, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, finish your slide, and then after your slide, I'll go through questions.
Okay. The next one was based on any new Treasury guidance received this week. Can the administration provide your understanding and interpretation on limitations? I would say that while the new guidance and FAQs that were released this week did relax some of the more stringent limitations that we saw, there are still a lot of limitations, and I think part of that has been played out through the conversation that we've already had. I will say that I believe it was yesterday a bipartisan group of senators, to include Lisa Murkowski and Dan Sullivan, did introduce legislation called the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security. Oh, nope, sorry. The Coronavirus Relief Fund Flexibility Act that essentially would provide a lot more flexibility for local governments in this area. I think for the most part, the legislation is an add-on to what I and others have been saying, which is this is actually what the true intent of Congress was when they passed the CARES Act. So the hope is that enough senators and members of the House agree with this legislation and it can get passed in relatively short order. I believe that it actually would give us a lot more flexibility. But in terms of where we are looking at this, we are still kind of examining and talking with folks. But over the coming week or so, we should have a better understanding of where that is. Another one is, can the administration share any plans they have for the allocations of money in broad terms? I think I already kind of did that on the previous slide, but happy to answer any additional questions on that. And then finally is, if LB&A, which is the Labor Budget and Audit, or Legislative Budget and Audit Committee, doesn't allocate the funding on Wednesday, which they did not, what will the process be for the legislature and the governor? So essentially the process that they are going through is the governor has proposed through the RPL process, which is revised programs legislative, a way for him to quickly push money out. Obviously, the legislature through LB&A still has to approve that. They are still they still have a lot of disagreements about that because, at least from the legislature's perspective, the governor is pushing money out in either new line items or in line items that they don't believe are completely appropriate. My best understanding of how this process works is that after 45 days, if LB&A has not approved this or is still pending, that the governor can automatically then start pushing out the money. So I believe the 45-day threshold is sometime in the middle of June. Obviously, I think everyone agrees that waiting until that long will have very negative and severe impacts. So the hope is that the legislature and the governor will agree to some sort of solution here in the very near future so that not just the money that we're talking about, but additional money for small businesses and other programs can be released and put into the community more quickly. So with that, that was the list of questions. Again, happy to answer any other additional questions over the next hour.
Thanks. All right, so I have 3 folks.
And I will stop, if there's no objection, I will stop sharing my screen and just
actually
listen.
I do think that Meg had a question based on one of your slides.
Okay.
And maybe Suzanne too. So Meg?
Thank you. So on the previous slide, there was an amount for community assistance. Excuse me. Can you provide me a little bit of context of what that amount and how it compares to what we got this past year, and whether or not that amount could help make up for any decrease in bed tax revenue? Because I think we're still in the point where we're uncertain if we can replace bed tax revenue, lost bed tax revenue due to COVID with this particular type of funding.
Through the chair, Assemblymember Zalatel, that is a great question, and that is one of the things that we've been spending a lot of time reading the new Treasury guidance. As I mentioned in one of the, or in the previous slide as well, one of the new aspects of the guidance is that they are allowing municipalities or local governments to make the presumption that payroll costs for essentially public safety and public health employees are services that have been substantially dedicated to mitigating or responding to the COVID-19 health emergency. I believe, and our read of this is that is one way that they are allowing local governments to ease or lessen some of the impacts from the COVID-19 pandemic. But these are certainly questions that we are still, talking through. And I will also invite Kate to provide any additional comments on that, because she has obviously been very much involved with me on trying to figure this exact question out.
Actually, if I may, I have maybe a more clear version of that question. Between things like payroll relief and additional community assistance, have we kind of done a balance sheet to see where we're starting to shake out with other areas of lost revenue and kind of where our gap is right now and how much that might be?
Yes, I'll through the chair, Assemblymember Zalatel, I will take a first swipe at that, and then if Mr. Slivka has anything to add, he certainly can. But the answer to that is yes, we are very much looking at that. I would say that one of the challenges that we are facing is that I think, as many people saw today, the unemployment rate is near 15%, and we are at least in my memory and thinking back in the last, I'd say almost 100 years, the closest analogy is the Great Depression. So we are having some difficulty trying to figure out where do we, or what, how do we look at what we budgeted for versus what we are expecting, because we don't have any near-term analogy to look at. So I think what Treasury and Finance are doing are essentially saying, hey, as we move into these summer months, May, June, July, we can quickly, hopefully, be able to look at what the, for instance, the bed tax revenue that we are bringing in looks like compared to the last couple of years, and see what decline there was there, and hopefully come up with a better way to get to a more accurate number. I think right now, if we were going to throw out any number, it would be so wildly speculative that I don't know how productive it would be to even talk about it. But it is something that we are very much looking at and trying to figure out. And with that, I'll see if Alex has anything to add to that.
Thanks, Jason. No, I think Jason answered it quite clearly. So much is unknown. I think, Meg, you've stated the obvious. Tourism is going to be down. Bed tax is going to be down. How much is hard to guess. Just as a reminder, in years past, that has been roughly, or in the budget we have, 12.8 million out of a total budget of 767 million. So there are many wild cards that are unknown. Especially, I think, as we've talked many times, real and personal property is the bulk of our tax at 582 million. We think we're going to get the bulk of that because, as I think I've mentioned many times, much of that is collected from residential. 2/3 of it is from residential, and of the residential, the vast majority of those do it via escrow. So that money is already there. But as Jason has said, until we get a further idea of how the economic recovery progresses, how does unemployment change, how does the government's unemployment payments to individuals continue over the course of the summer, all of those things are going to roll into trying to figure out what kind of hole we have. Having said all that, if we truly get 156 million from the state, and as Jason has said, through a lot of very active work with the federal government, we've gotten guidance that allows us to use that money, as Jason said, presumptively to pay for police and fire, which are the vast majority of our budget anyway. It seems like we should have enough money to pay all of our expenses. But, how much of a differential that is, as Jason has said, it's too early to tell.
Okay, thanks. Suzanne?
Thanks, Felix. And I just wanted to comment first before my questions that we do have that as a Budget Finance Committee agenda item, scenarios of the C-19 impact on revenue projections. So that's something that we plan to revisit regularly in the Budget and Finance Committee. So I have two general questions. And Jason, thank you for breaking out the different funding streams and the administration's plan thus far. My first question, how did you identify and quantify the community and economic need? I too am concerned about targeting where it's needed most. I know we're going to have conversations down the road as to how to do that, but thus far I would be interested in hearing what information and feedback you've been getting. And then secondly, how have you been able to identify gaps in the funding programs, namely to target those groups that haven't been able to get support through like the federal programs? Because, concerning the cash flow issue, presumably some of these programs would address that. And I don't know what flexibility there is in supplementing unemployment. I know there are complex rules, but as far as identifying these areas of need, especially for our specific community at this level, seems one of the major intents of this money that's expected to be directly distributed to communities. Thanks.
Sure. Through the chair, Chris Schutte, Assemblymember LaFrance, great question. And the short answer to that is we're able to understand somewhat, and this is not a complete picture, but understand somewhat where the needs exist in the community through a couple of different tools. Keep in mind that we have a very strong multifaceted, multi-industry network through the Economic Resiliency Task Force. And the Economic Resiliency Task Force and its team member organizations are regularly conducting surveys of the business community, not specifically individual residents at this time, but of the business community, to help us understand both where the areas of need are and frankly, where some of the gaps are in the existing state and federal tools or programs that are available to them. That group has become de facto experts on federal policy as it relates to the stimulus funding, and have clearly identified and been very articulate in defining where those gaps exist so that we are able as a municipality to tailor, for example, our requests of state and federal delegations, but also create programs to fill those gaps. And so things like small business assistance and rental assistance and property tax due dates moving and permit fee reductions. Those are some areas of need identified by the business community and brought to the municipality. But I will be the first to admit it is an imperfect tool and does not accurately capture all of the inputs or all of the data that we really could use in understanding the true impact of the COVID pandemic on our neighbors. I think Assemblymember Dunbar pointed out earlier about the high number of renters in our community. And the rental assistance program gives us a bit of a snapshot into some of the rent-based challenges that they are facing. Much like the unemployment numbers published by state labor statistics gives us a broad macro view of the economy and can identify sectors that are particularly hurting right now. So we have various tools. They are not going to present a 100% accurate picture of every component or level of our community, but we use them all in helping influence and shape the policies and decisions we're making. And I believe my counterpart, Mr. Bockenstadt, would like to follow up.
Through the chair, I think Chris did such a great job that I will just sign on to his comments.
Great.
Thanks. Felix, can I quickly add?
Sure.
Would you be able to share with us, and I apologize if you already have in some form and I've missed it, some of the data and however you're quantifying it or whatever formats it's in with us?
This is Chris, absolutely, through the chair, Assemblymember LaFrance, absolutely. We've tried not to bury you in numbers and statistics in the weekly reports, but I believe we put some of the results we saw from I believe an AEDC business survey in either last week's or the week before, and we'll continue to do that.
Thanks.
Thanks. All right, so one last comment from John, and then we'll move on to the second half of our meeting.
Actually, I'll wait. I think mine would be good for our general conversation. Thanks.
Got it. Okay, great. Well, a big thank you to Jason, Lance, Alex, and Chris for the presentation and all the answers. So now we're going to go ahead and begin second half of this, which is the assembly discussion. And I want to start this, as I said in the email, with a values-based discussion before we get into the broad ideas. I would normally do this kind of thing more roundtable if we were in person, which, Jamie, you haven't had a chance to experience that yet, but you will eventually. But I want to encourage everyone to participate as you are comfortable doing. Since this is an idea that was brought to us by Meg, I'm going to ask her to kick this off with any statements that she may have.
Thanks, Felix. So what I did after making the mention of kind of the 50,000 foot view and getting Felix's email is I went back and looked at our assembly priorities in those areas specifically. So that's kind of where I started, maybe at my 51,000 foot view. And those areas, just to refresh our memories, are communications, homelessness, quality of life, public safety, and economic development. So I came up with a communications value statement that says the Assembly should engage the public about the CARES Act and the ways that the funding can be spent. In my typical fashion, I followed it up with a question to myself or to share, which is how can the Assembly educate and engage the public about the CARES Act funding and eligible areas of expenditure to solicit their needs and ideas. I similarly did around homelessness, excuse me. So these are both just questions, but they kind of encapsulate some of the values. They're driven by the statements we made in our priorities. How will the current COVID-19 emergency response change the landscape of shelter and other social services that address homelessness? And then identified contributors to homelessness include substance misuse and mental health needs. Can CARES Act funding work to support work that addresses these underlying contributors, and what changes will have to be made in light of the COVID-19 emergency? So that's,
hey, Meg.
Yeah.
I've gotten a request, and I think you can do it since the button's on my Outlook, but can you share your screen so folks can look at what you're reading?
Let's see. I can try. It's just in my notes program. So is it showing?
Yeah, it's showing.
Okay. Okay. So that's it. I mean, that I've pretty much read what I did, but that's kind of how I processed it, and that's kind of how I came at the thinking for a value statement.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Do you want me to get rid of that? I don't know how now.
Let's leave it on just for another little second so folks can read it. And then I guess I will open it up. Anyone else, feel free to put yourself in the chat or text me if you had a chance to develop your own values statements or just have anything to contribute on this side of the conversation before we get to the broad idea side of the conversation.
Felix, I'm happy to take some notes on this note, and then it can go back to you and out, so you can see that kind of live if you'd like.
Okay, great. Yeah, Forrest.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if this qualifies as a value or as a broad idea. I think that's sometimes a little bit difficult to distinguish, but something we've been working on in the at the Assembly for the last, really the last 4 years or more, is trying to make ourselves more financially independent from the state. And the reason, obviously, because the state continues to reduce their support for us. And so I think that the sort of value or goal that I think we need to balance, if we actually do get $156 million, or let's say we get the $18 million to Merrill Field, for example, I think the value you're trying to balance are, one, the need for immediate stimulus with this current crisis, but then two, also having that long range view of, can we use this fund in any way that preserves and protects the financial health of the municipality long term. And to me, I think I certainly tilt more towards the immediate financial stimulus, but I don't think we should lose sight of opportunities to make ourselves more financially strong and financially independent. And there's a lot, I think, creative ways to do that. Thank you.
Thanks. Crystal.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. You know, I guess I've had a lot of thoughts on some of this for a while, and so it's kind of nice to be able to just throw some things out there, and at least, you know, you'll kind of know where I'm coming from, you know, my perspective. And I've kind of had two different focuses. One has been on looking at the CARES Act and trying to figure out how we use that to really support the community. And then the other one is to look at the budget. I really see there, you know, they definitely are two different things, but the things that are going on in our community impacts both of those funds, or both of those entities, if you will, are very similar. So one of the things that I've thought about is that, you know, we definitely have it's a challenge to us to try to figure out how to educate people at this time. And I'm glad that Meg brought that up, because I think communicating to everybody what's really going on is going to be critical. And I'm not exactly sure how we do that, but it's really problematic, I think, for us right now, because we don't even know enough to be able to tell people what's going to happen, where the money's going to go, who's going to get what. So I'm hoping that at least coming forward with some general principles or a philosophy, if you will, I think is going to be important. And so with that said, one of the things that you probably have already summarized from some of my comments is that, you know, a great deal of my focus is on, like I said, putting the tourniquet on the part of the body that's bleeding the most. And I think we have a significant identifiable group of people in our community, the ones that are business owners or employees of those small businesses, and to some extent, some of the large businesses. But whether they're an owner of an actual facility and a business, or they're an employee, you know, they're going to be asked to pay their property taxes. And some of them, even if they're an employee, they may own their own home, but they've got to pay that rent, they've got to pay, or that mortgage, and they've got to pay their property taxes. So there's a huge group out there that I think is pretty identifiable, that is looking for help in how they get past this season of no income. So I don't want to lose sight of that. And I think people are kind of aware of that, but I think our job is to figure out how to fill that gap, how to make that connection for them over this period of this dry spell, if you will. So I think that's important. But the other thing is too, in terms of looking at the budget, I think that's the other thing, that we can really look at how to reduce our expenses. And we're going to be asked to do that, knowing that there's going to be people who can't pay, that we're in a bit of a lull for a while until we figure out all these financial things. We have to be looking at how do you curb in expenses a bit until we get over this. And for me, it comes down to the philosophy of, okay, you pay the rent, you feed the kids, and you don't buy anything unnecessary. So that kind of comes from a family perspective, you know, a homeowner's perspective. But when you have to tighten your belt and buckle down because you don't know what money's coming in, those are the things you do. You fix the fixed costs, you know, you have to pay. You definitely want to take care of your employees. You know, you're going to feed them because you don't want to increase the unemployment line. And you're just going to have to forego some things that would have been nice to have and maybe you'd planned on buying, but you know what, the cash just isn't there right now. So I'm hoping that we can send a message that says we're going to be really critical of where our money is going, knowing that the public's money may not be there either. I think one of the other key things is to keep in mind that our cash flow should stay at home. Whatever cash we have coming in needs to work right here in our community. So that means focusing on capital projects, things that we know will keep people employed and working here, And maybe we don't send our money to the lower 48 to buy something right now. Maybe we just keep the cash here, put it into other components of our own financial structure. So those are just a couple things I'll throw out in terms of what I'm thinking. And I hope that we can actually craft some kind of a message, even though we're still in this season of unknown and to a certain extent, some unpredictability. We ought to be able to at least tell the public that, we're going to be focused from these basic key points that will hopefully help them understand and give them an opportunity to chime in and tell us, give us those suggestions of where we go from here. So thank you.
Thank you. And big thanks to Meg for scribing for this portion. John.
Oh, thanks. I don't know that I got the big visions that others do, but so thanks for the ideas here. One thing on the homeless thing, kind of following up on what Meg had said, at some point we've got to get them out of Bokie and Sullivan Arena, because at least out of Bokie, because people want to use the ice there. But it seems like if we can make a transition to an additional shelter that's more long-term, kind of under the funding umbrella of the CARES Act, that would move us ahead in a direction we were going, and it could be good. And I want to make a point, and it's a little bit towards what Forrest had said earlier, and who was damaged in this, is being damaged, right now with this pandemic. And in a lot of regards, most people still have their jobs and are still making the money that they made before. We have higher unemployment than we've seen for many, many years, but most people are still getting their paychecks. People who got laid off and got unemployment, if they were making less than $20 an hour in their job, they made more money under unemployment. Plus they got the $1,200 stimulus. So, people who are working retail and other service jobs that got laid off actually made more money being laid off than they did when they were working. It's unclear how long that will last. I mean, they said about 2 months, but that may be extended. So the people who, if we're thinking about different ways to spend this, people who are hurt, of course, are the businesses that closed. And I want to be careful when we come up with ways of helping that, to try to focus on that and not, if we say, oh, just cut property taxes. I do not want to cut property taxes for any business that was allowed to stay open during those closures. I mean, Walmart, Target, places like that, they had windfall profits or sales. But the businesses that closed, those are the ones we want to watch on. And also people who are paid by commission, their commissions dropped. And those are people who are a little bit, they don't fit into any neat program here. And then, people who looking for summer jobs, and we know tourism's going to get hammered. So that's a large number of people, and they won't get unemployment because a lot of them were in school, or for whatever reason, they're not working in the rest of the year. So those are some groups that, I think we should kind of keep our mind on how do we help them. And I don't have any solutions on how to do that. Also want to make a point on the Paycheck Protection Program, which is focused on, that's a great benefit for businesses. And it certainly has some value, but it's really focused on the paycheck. I mean, that is, again, it's another program for employees, not so much the businesses. And in fact, only up to a quarter of that loan, forgiven or not, can be used for rent and utilities, but all the other costs that business face are still sitting on those businesses. So that's, a nice program, but not really all that it's made out to be. And if you don't increase or maintain your payroll at where it was last year, then you quickly lose any of the forgiveness. It drops very quickly. And most businesses, if they're staffing sensibly for the current environment where people are just not shopping as much or going out as much, they will have fewer people than they did last year. And that will be, drop any of their forgiveness. So basically, they're getting loans to pay paychecks, and a little bit for utilities and their rent. So anyway, don't think of that as like this great salvation. A business gets that and they were all good. So anyway, those are just some thoughts I wanted to share. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, John.
Did you get all that, Meg?
Abbreviated, but yes.
Great. Anyone else on this one before we go And I know, like Forrest said, these conversations are probably going to weave back and forth, so that's okay. But anyone else on values before we go to broad ideas? All right, so Austin.
Thanks, Felix. And I don't know if this fits in the values, broad ideas, or where, but just in response to what John was saying, there's obviously some difference in what different entities, the impact to different entities, but I don't think it's as black and white as, oh, essential businesses are fine and those that weren't are not, because there were a lot of, say, restaurants, for instance, that, you know, people were eating at home more. And so, or they weren't allowed, you know, could only do takeout. And so I think that it's just more nuanced than that. And I don't want to have that, that strict of a divide. I think we need to think more about, just more broadly about impact. I don't think it's that simple. And then just to add, I really appreciated Forrest's comments earlier, and Crystal too, for framing the conversation, but I don't think property taxes is the right place to do it. I think what we need to be focusing on is need. And for instance, I have a mortgage, but I have my job and so does my partner. And so I don't feel like I need that stimulus. I want people who need it to get it, not everyone who owns a home. And I don't think those are the same thing.
Thanks. Suzanne?
Thanks, Felix. And I don't know that this is so much a value. I guess for me, what comes top of mind is survival and making our community whole. And so the issue, like I mentioned earlier, about identifying and quantifying the greatest need and addressing the root cause of the cash flow problems is top of mind in this process for me. And, you know, making sure, and like as Austin said too, that the assistance goes where it's needed. And I like the idea, you know, Forrest, you brought up like the PFD, and my only concern about that approach would be how to prevent the same thing that happens with the PFD, where money doesn't necessarily get spent locally from happening. I mean, presumably it may be different if the, you know, the needs are so great. I'd also add that after recovery and, you know, getting through this so we don't have any major failures among any particular segments, is resiliency in terms of strengthening businesses. So if we do have another round of this, more can operate curbside. And I don't know, maybe all the ones who can already do, or if there are some who would benefit from some grants to add plexiglass, or, I mean, I don't know, or software so that they could do more online local delivery. And I agree with points that have been raised, and Crystal had said too, about the local emphasis on the funds and on the recovery, and, you know, whatever we can do, again, to make our community whole and to support capital projects that put people to work and, you know, reverberate through that line, I think is, you know, one of the things we should definitely focus on.
Great. Thanks, Suzanne. So I'm going to go ahead and add my own comment here and then move us on to the next part of the discussion. And yeah, I want to thank Suzanne for using the term resiliency. I think that's the term that I was going to use, but I want to speak of it in a broader context than just businesses, and say that, you know, this pandemic has, as was stated in the op-ed that everyone hopefully had a chance to read, that it's laid bare a lot of different systemic issues in our society that, you know, in the span of just a couple of months, we've seen so many different issues pop up. So for me, a key and core value is that we are making our community more resilient, both for now and into the future, so that these issues aren't, so that we're not going back to the old normal for these systemic issues, and that we're developing a new track for us. And I think that's really critically important for us to think in those terms. Okay, I go ahead. I see Forrest, and then we'll move on to the second half. I have a quick introduction for that. Go ahead, Forrest.
Well, I think again, I'm not totally clear on what the next half is, but why don't you do your intro and maybe my comments will be more appropriate for that discussion.
Cool, awesome. So yeah, just a quick introduction. So we're going to talk about broad ideas now, and I want to emphasize that this discussion should be broad, and I think avoid attaching dollar values or intricate specific details because we don't know the extent to which the guidance may change. So as everyone knows, we're going to be continuing this conversation over the coming weeks and likely months. So there's going to be plenty of time, I think, for us to get into specifics as we learn more. I want to read a quick statement that Chris sent me, which goes into some of this specific broad ideas. I think Chris's statement is more on what not to do. So I'll just read it verbatim. I have only one message for the body at this time. I will strongly oppose any effort to replace funds in our budget with relief funds. Relief funds should be used for COVID-19 relief, not some shell game to cover current costs with relief money. I appreciate the administration's effort to use limited cash we have to pilot relief projects so that we can develop a data-based approach. I will also be pushing for a small business relief plan that targets very small business interests. The tide should lift all boats. Christopher Constant. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you, Forrest.
Thank you. So I wanted to comment a little bit on the idea of doing capital projects with these funds. And I don't think it's clear to any of us that we can yet. And when we say these funds, there are these different buckets of funds. It's pretty clear that like the Merrill Field funds, for example, probably can be used for capital projects. But it does sort of conflict a little bit with what Chris just said in the sense that if there are capital projects that are shovel ready, that are designed to the point where we can put people to work doing them, then sort of by definition, they're things that we thought of before the COVID-19 disaster and things we started planning before the COVID-19 disaster. And so I think there is a tension there. But the example that I would like to use is if there's any way that we can use these funds to complete the construction of the Alaska Center for Treatment, which we've been talking about for a long time, but we now have another separate stream of revenue potentially for its operating funds. But that is something that to me is one, very close to shovel ready, two, directly related to public health. And so I think there is a very colorable argument to connecting it to this disaster. And then three, clearly is this long-term need for our community. It gets to what Felix was talking about with these systemic issues that were laid bare by this disease, by this catastrophe, because folks that were suffering from addiction or homelessness and those kind of things were more susceptible to this disease and presented a variety of challenges for our emergency operations center. And we did extraordinary things. Had we been a little more resilient as a community and had fewer of those kind of challenges, we might have been able to respond better. But again, it's a little bit in tension with what Chris just said, because again, by definition, if a capital project is ready to put people to work, then it's something we thought of before the coronavirus. Thank you.
Thanks. I think Jason might have a response, something to add to that.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Assemblymember Dunbar, those were, it's a great line of thinking. I will just caution as we continue to think about this, that in the updated Treasury guidance, one of the questions that they answer is, could fund payments be used for capital improvement projects that broadly provide potential economic development in a community? And their response is, again, not the most clear, but they say, in general, no. If capital improvement projects are not necessary expenditures incurred due to the COVID-19 public health emergency, then fund payments may not be used for such projects. So I think there might be some discussion that we can have around the latter part of your comments about, how closely related are some of the projects to COVID-19, but I would just caution members that at least as it is currently written and with this funding, it doesn't appear that broad capital project use is allowed. But I would add that with some of the other direct funding that we are getting, specifically Merrill Field and potentially the transit money, that might actually be an allowed use. I'm just speaking specifically to the proposed $156 million.
Thanks. Did you want to chime in again, Forrest?
I guess just a really quick follow-up. Then I don't know if this counts as a capital expense, but I know some other jurisdictions have already done this, but I'm not sure if they're using CARES Act money. Some places have purchased hotels to use as facilities because they need to, have individual rooms for people experiencing quarantine. But I don't know if they'll sell those hotels afterwards. Presumably they'll hold on to those and use them for long-term housing facilities. But would something like that, like purchasing a hotel, be allowable, Jason?
I might kick that over to Chris Schutte, who actually will probably be able to answer that question more fully. If he is still on.
Doesn't look like it. Can Chris just email us with a response to that?
Sure,
question?
we will get the response, but very basically, I will answer it that yes, there have been some jurisdictions that have purchased hotels, but I do not believe that they have done this through the CARES Act. It's been probably more through the FEMA reimbursement side, but that is something that we can get Chris to answer in a more full way.
And Mr. Chairman, Chris Schutte is back and off of the emergency phone call he just answered, and I have no idea what the question is, so fire away.
Chris, we were just wondering if we could use any of the pots of federal funds to purchase hotels, and then if we could use those, as housing facilities after the crisis has passed.
Thank you. Through the chair, Assemblymember Dunbar, that is a complex question with what I will try to give a fairly simple answer. The short answer is the CARES Act contains multiple buckets of money, and I'm not going to talk specific to the bucket of money that you all have been referring to primarily, the 1.25 billion, but I'm going to talk about some other buckets that go to other entities or agencies. Short answer is yes, there is the ability to use some of the additional CARES Act monies that flow to states and cities through into those other buckets to do things like that. And the go-to bucket that most people would think of in this regard would be perhaps CDBG funds or CDBG-CV funds in this case. And so there are ways that the CARES Act funds that are flowing through those other federal programs could be used for issues around homelessness, such as purchasing non-congregate living facilities, et cetera. I don't want to get people's hopes up, though, because Alaska and Anchorage in particular is not a large recipient of CDBG monies. But it is certainly something that we have been thinking and talking about ever since we saw the first CARES Act monies flow to the different funding sources. So kind of a long answer. It's sort of a yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Meg.
Thanks, Felix. I've been thinking along the same lines as Mr. Dunbar. And I've shared some initial thoughts with the administration, but now's the time to verbalize them all for you, which is we had a group of individuals who couldn't go to mass shelter for a variety of reasons. And some of those reasons are active drug addiction or alcoholism. or significant mental health issues, or they were trespassed and may or may not have been related to those other issues. So I think there's some underlying, there's an underlying response needed for those individuals when it comes to the COVID-19 response, whether that's quicker access or availability of treatment, or something like that. So I don't have, I haven't put my finger on it yet as to what it might be, but I definitely thinking in similar terms that while we were thinking we needed resources for the general population of the municipality around substance misuse and mental health, that one, those things have been exacerbated by the pandemic, and two, those gaps had public health implications during the pandemic. So I wanted to share those thoughts. I also wanted to say, just quickly looking at the notes, we covered all the areas in our priorities with our really broad statements other than public safety. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Okay. Thanks, Meg. Crystal?
Thanks, Felix. I don't have any comments on the public safety part, but that was good that Meg noticed that we kind of skipped over that. But I did want to say that, I had previously mentioned the idea of supporting the capital projects, and I was actually referring to that just so y'all know that I'm clear, or will be clear on this, but I am talking about the budget, the amount of money that we know is in the budget, especially considering all the bonds that passed recently. I'm hoping that we can support the part of the budget that maintains some of those construction projects and those capital projects. And I'm not sure I'm real crazy about using funds from CARES to go down that road, because I tend to agree with Mr. Constant that this is really meant for relief. Now, it's certainly possible that some of that relief could be for those taxpayers who can't pay. And that then goes obviously into the city revenues that would then support those capital projects that are voter approved. So anyway, so I just wanted to be clear that I'm not necessarily in favor of using the CARES funding to put into more capital projects, but I do want to be able to protect the capital projects that have been voter approved. So thanks.
Thanks. All right, any other thoughts or ideas that folks have? Again, I might normally do a round table, but we're not sitting around a table this time, so feel free to just chime in. Okay, so I'm not seeing any. So what I'm going to do now, I guess, since we have the time, is I'm going to go to audience participation, and then I'll come back to this conversation in case folks do want to chime in. So for folks who are participating, I'm going to read your phone number. If that is you, press *6, introduce yourself, and then you'll have 3 minutes. So we'll start with 227-3708. Okay, then I will go to 250-6797. Okay, now I will go to 250-8272. Okay, and just as a reminder, it's star, oh, there we go, 250, go ahead.
My name is Adele, and I wanted to make a suggestion for the use of the CARES Act money to extend a program that we already have here in Anchorage, and that is the Meals on Wheels for the elders. And that maybe during this pandemic, to keep our ill and our elders at home, we could possibly look into expanding that program extensively, and also making it a way of checking in on those elders that are now in their homes and not able to get out and socialize, so that, you know, every now and then there's somebody making contact with them and making sure that they're okay. Because the Meals on Wheels Act, for a lot of people, it isn't just you know, the only meal that they get. For a lot of them, it's the only interaction that they get. And if the goal is to keep our elder and our ill safe, then, you know, rather than telling them, well, you know, why don't you be in the grocery store at 7 or 8 a.m. in the morning, why don't we expand the ways that people can qualify for that program, maybe lower the age, maybe with a doctor's note or something, to make sure that those that are most vulnerable in our communities, which is where it was my understanding that these funds are supposed to be going to, are being taken care of and being seen to by an infrastructure that's already in place. And I don't know if anyone had thought of that, but it would seem to me to be a good way to make sure that you're taking care of the most vulnerable.
Great, thank you so much, Adele. And all right, just making sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, so now moving on to 2633853. Okay, then 3339613. Okay, so those last two numbers, I think that's a city hall number, and I think that last one is an assembly member. Okay, so then I'll go ahead, go back then. Just let me check the chat, see if there was anyone else who wanted to chime in on this discussion. If not, I'll just use these last couple minutes to talk about the series of meetings that we're going to have for the remainder of the month that are going to go deeper dive into some of the issues that we've talked about and some that we haven't. Okay, not seeing anyone, then I'll just quickly go through this series of meetings. So as you all have received via email, we are going to be having a series of meetings where we're going to be talking with businesses, talking to the various task forces, and talking to a variety of different groups and stakeholders that I think would be able to inform a lot of these discussions that we are having. So I'll just go through this list very quickly, starting with the first meeting, which is going to be with the administration on Friday, May 15th, so next Friday. And just generally, that one is talking about the path forward, which by next Friday might look very different from what we know today, likely will. And also be talking about the emergency declaration in general, which is set to end June 5th, and any possible future extension of that. Then next we'll have a meeting on, it'll be a special health policy committee meeting slated right now for Wednesday, May 20th, where we're going to dive into any additional health-related questions folks have. I know there are a couple that folks want to dive deeper into, so that'll be the meeting for us to do that. Then the sort of meat of it, of the meetings are going to happen thereafter, where we're going to meet with the mayor's Economic Resiliency Task Force and hopefully the Alaska Economic Stabilization Team on Thursday, May 21st. Then we will hear from businesses and various industry groups on Friday, May 22nd. Also on Friday, May 22nd, we'll have a housing roundtable where we will talk with housing groups and learn more about landlord-tenant issues and how the real estate market is doing and some of the issues that they are facing. Then the last two meetings will be on Wednesday, May 27th. That one, we will talk extensively about homelessness shelters, issues facing our nonprofit organizations, as well as our higher education organizations, institutions. Then last, we'll end on Thursday, May 28th with a workforce roundtable where we will talk about childcare issues, any specific disproportionate impacts that various communities are facing, issues related to protecting our workers, and then any workforce training issues. This is all going to be continually refined as we get closer, but that's just generally the meetings that we're going to be having, again, to help inform us as we continue this discussion. Any final comments before I close the meeting? All right, I'm not seeing any. Thanks so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend.
Thanks, Felix.